Today, the Senate and House of Reps committees laid the Electoral Act Amendment Bill on the floor of the two chambers, hoping to discuss and pass the bill tomorrow. And we also take a closer look at the Security Summit report of the House of Representatives presented to President Buhari on the solutions to the insecurity situations in the country. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the program. I'm Sean Kimale in Abuja, the nation's capital. We're now taking our eyes off the ball on the amendment of the Electoral Act, and tonight we stick to it. We stay on the matter and dissect what the National Assembly is doing to ensure that we get the best deal as Nigerians for our elections. So welcome on board, everyone, wherever you may be watching. Tonight, for the next 60 minutes or so, my guests will be giving you perspectives and insight into some of your biggest stories across the land. Before we get started on the conversation for tonight, let's check out some of your political roundup stories.
The Federal Executive Council has approved 309.9 billion naira federal road contract for Dangote Group of Companies. The Minister of Works and Housing, Babatunde Fashola, told journalists after the council meeting, chaired by the President, Muhammadu Buhari, that 5 road projects totaling 274.9 kilometers of federal roads under the Federal Government Road Infrastructure Tax Credit Policy will be advanced by the Dangote Industries as tax credit. The Council equally approved the formalization of Police Special Services Unit operated through a private-public partnership and enabled tariffs and billing schemes to tap revenues and block leakages. After the FEC meeting, President Buhari received the Governor of Imo State, Senator Hope Uzodinma, at the State House.
Criminality everywhere.
The Bauchi State Governor Bala Mohammed has accused some politicians of sponsoring criminalities in the state and says he will soon expose them. The governor is also worried that some traditional leaders have been compromised and warned that anyone found wanting won't be spared.
I know some leaders of the state who are busy bringing criminals to the state. I will talk when the time comes.
Rise to second.
And the House of Representatives is directing the Nigerian Navy to suspend the planned pre-screening exercise for the shortlisted candidates for recruitment with a view to strengthening the federal character law. This is a sequel to a motion of urgent public importance by Honorable Ben Ibakwa, informing the House that all the successful candidates that are to report for training in 2 batches at the Nigerian Navy Basic Training School on Port Harcourt, River State, are all from a particular part of the country, which negates the federal character principle of all inclusiveness, equity, and fair play.
After months of consideration and anticipation from Nigerians, the National Assembly committees working on the Electoral Act Amendment have laid it before the different houses today at plenary. The Senate is expected to debate the report on Thursday, that is tomorrow, before it proceeds on its annual recess. Ahead of the presentation and debate of the report, Senate President Ahmed Lawan says that there are various insinuations that the leadership of the Senate or leadership of the National Assembly has tampered with the report of the Committee on INEC of both chambers. Listen to the Senate President Ahmed Lawan.
There are various accusations, insinuations that the leadership of the Senate, sometimes leadership of the National Assembly, are tempered with the report of the Committee on INEC of both chambers. Some of those accusing the leadership of the National Assembly are misinformed, innocent. Some are simply mischievous and rabble-rousers. This is the first time this report is laid here. And this report of the committee This is the decision of the Committee on INEC, and therefore, whatever will be discussed or considered about the Electoral Act Amendment Bill will be on the basis of what has been presented to the Senate here. If anybody feels very strongly about anything, lobby distinguished senators to canvass for your position rather than blackmail leadership, because my telephone line and that of the Honorable Speaker were published. In one day, I received over 900 SMS messages saying we have manipulated this. We didn't. We will do what is right. We have our procedures, and lobbying is part of democracy.
You heard the Senate President Hamid Lawan. Let's begin the conversation tonight, and I'd like to start with my guest here in our Abuja studio. I have a former federal lawmaker and distinguished Senator Ayo Adeche. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
And I have a former senior staff at the Independent National Electoral Commission, a director of training, Anna Osive. Isiave. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You taught me how to pronounce his name. I don't know how I got to miss it yet again. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for coming.
You're welcome.
Let me begin with you because you're familiar with the ongoings in the National Assembly and you perhaps can predict what will happen tomorrow. For a lot of Nigerians that perhaps will be wondering what will happen when now it's been late. This is perhaps the final lap in considering the bill before it is passed. Then it will be transmitted to the president for his asset, right?
Yes, basically, yeah.
So tomorrow, they plan to go on recess after that effort. Give us a sense of what they will do tomorrow. A clause-by-clause consideration, is that what will happen?
That is part of the process. Every clause is considered and passed, and that is what will happen tomorrow if they're actually going on vacation. That means there's an urgency. So everything will start and be passed tomorrow. Sections that will be included, all will be passed, and those that have any serious opposition will be dropped. But that is very highly unlikely at that stage.
So it's almost cast in stone because of what the committees have worked on, the public hearings and all the consideration. It's almost cast in stone, so they will basically vote for it.
Yes, they will vote clause by clause. Changes could still come in, and there could be division. Anything could happen. But largely, what the committee laid today would form about 99% of what will be passed.
About 99%?
Yes.
So give us a sense of what would happen, because this is an instrument coming from the National Assembly, basically an act of the National of the Parliament.
Yes.
So it's being amended. It's not a new law, but there still will be an harmonization between the two chambers. The Green Chamber will do theirs, and the Red Chambers will do theirs. But when will the harmonization come? A special committee set up for that, or how does it often operate?
Well, harmonization, if there are differences between what the House of Reps passed and what the Senate eventually passes tomorrow, then there will be a committee between the two houses, and they will look at the differences and harmonize where there are disagreements, and where they cannot resolve, they will drop the controversial clauses. So that is the procedure.
Would they have to bring, if they harmonize, would they have to bring it back to the floor?
Well, once it's harmonized, yes, it will come back for final passage, yeah, and transmission to Mr. President will follow thereafter.
That's interesting. So you've given us the procedural, the institutions around how these laws are passed.
Yes.
So Nigerians have an understanding of what will happen tomorrow. Give us a sense of, as a former staff of INEC, risen to that level as a director in INEC. Give us a sense of some of the arguments that you've heard people talk about this bill, the issue of electronic transmission of result. We spoke with the former chairman of INEC, Professor Jega, who said, look, if you cannot pass electronic transmission with electronic voting, it does not make sense.
Yes.
Is it right? What do you make of that statement?
I think I agree totally with that statement from the chairman of the commission. Now, if you can pass a bill allowing electronic voting, and you now disallow electronic transmission of results, you haven't done anything. You really have not done anything. You have only said that we should go right back to our old methods of running elections. That's what you have said. That's what you have said in that case.
Because okay, so please go ahead.
Yes, the chairman of INEC is
the former chairman, yeah, Professor Tyree Jega.
The former chairman and the current chairman are absolutely in order to crave for electronic voting and electronic transmission of election results. It's very much in order. Anything outside that is going back to the dark ages, which Nigeria at the moment cannot afford.
That's one of the touchy parts of this bill,
yes,
which a lot of people were talking about. Yes. And there are other areas I would like us to touch on. But one of the arguments, because we had the chairman of the Senate committee, and their thinking, according to him, is that because of internet penetration and the issues of technology, and that's the reason. Interestingly, Nigeria has just about 50% internet penetration, and we know the issue of power in the country also. And when you are transmitting results, you will need power. You will need internet. Do you agree with those kind of debates or arguments?
I don't. You see, those arguments are puerile. The arguments canvassed by those who don't want any improvement in our electoral process. They are those who really are afraid of technology in elections. That's my opinion.
So, I mean, what will electronic transmission do for our election? Will it stop rigging?
To a large extent, yes, it will. To a large extent. Because we do know that after the polls and preliminary election results have been obtained from the polling stations, we do know that such results are often tampered with between the polling stations and the collation centers, especially the ward collation centers. Electronic transmission of election results will make that, in fact, will frustrate, any attempt to tamper with election results coming from the polls at the polling stations, between the polling stations and the ward collation centers. So when election results are transmitted electronically, especially the way that was done in Edo State last year and Ogun State, in Ondo State, in the last governorship elections in those two states.
The election portal, result portal.
The election result portal. Where from EC8A, the statement, the statement of election results at the polls
are being captured
and transmitted live.
Yeah, and people can monitor.
And people can see.
Although,
and monitor.
we were told that they were not used, but they are being tested. It was, but people could monitor.
That's right.
So you think that
everybody could monitor? Stakeholders who are interested will primarily be in a position to see the election results.
All right. I mean, you have administered elections. You're speaking from a technical point of view.
Yes, sir.
Let's ask the man who has been a politician. I mean, who is a politician and who knows the ways of politicians, Senator Arishi. Why would anybody be afraid of electronic transmission of results? Or why should anybody be afraid?
It's typically the fear of the unknown. Ordinarily, it's the best way to go. There should be no reason for any apprehension. We thought when they introduced the GSM phone that the illiterates will never be able to use them. We've been proven wrong. So there is really nothing that is so difficult or that is rocket science in voting electronically and transmitting the same. Now, the issue of power. There are so many ways that has been resolved through long-lasting batteries, those that can work for like 24 hours or longer for the rural areas. And internet, basically, the whole country is more or less covered. Because if you have...
we have only 50% internet penetration.
That is the internet penetration. That is for those actually subscribing. It is not that if you take like any of these USB internet devices, you know, by the different networks, if you take them, they will go far. For example, if you think a particular network is not strong in an area, you buy the one that is strong there. You can carry 1, 2, or 3 different devices from different networks and still achieve 80, 90% penetration. All we need is once this is in place, it's more of a challenge to the networks to ensure that they deliver, because there is need for their networks to operate in the rural areas totally. So if there is no coverage, they will be losing money, particularly if the government says we have to vote using electronic devices, and we require internet, and we require power. The issue of power, that can be resolved through batteries, like I already said. But again, it's a question of what do we want to do. Some people will do things for history. Some, they leave it for others to accomplish. For us, I believe this government has been on the right track. I mean, if you look at what has been done in terms of registration and the effort of the government to get Nigerians to be known that these are Nigerians through the National Identity Commission, I believe this government can do anything that they want to do in the interest of this country. I have no doubt. And I know that this government of Buhari wants to leave a good legacy for this country. Why do we want to allow this opportunity to slip by and someone else will do? Because it's inevitable. Even if we want to remain the way we were, 20, 40, 50 years ago, it is no longer possible because the younger generation are completely restless. And opportunities that we have, they will continue to demand, and somebody will still have to do it. So I believe, without speculating on what will happen tomorrow, because I have not seen what is contained in the amendment, I believe the senators and the National Assembly as a whole, under the leadership of Lawan and Gbajabiamila, they want to leave a date with history, and I'm sure they will do what is right.
So let's look at it because it's perhaps one of the major issues that everybody is asking for. Give us electronic transmission of result, or else, you have watered down the Electoral Act amendment. Well, let me come to you because you are a technical person, and during the 2015 election, basically, there were arguments about the use of the card reader machine, and the issue of internet penetration also came to the fore at the time, and people were asking the same question. Now, look, what happens to those areas where you cannot find network? I remember the argument at that time to defend the card reader machine was that you can upload on it manually, pending the time you will walk into an area covered by network. For the transmission of results, can that also work? Can that argument or that technical coverage be sufficient or suffice for transmission of results?
You see, at that time, the card reader, the smart card reader, was designed for, as it were, electronic accreditation of voters. It was designed for that purpose and not really designed for the transmission of results, as it were. And largely the smart card reader was applicable in large expanse of area within the country. I do not recall any region of the country, even at remote locations, on remote localities, the smart card readers worked. And they worked effectively, where those in charge, those in charge, the electoral personnel, where they wanted the card reader, both the electoral personnel and other stakeholders, the contestants especially, the politicians, where they wanted the smart card reader to work, it worked. And those areas, relatively few, where the smart card reader did not work, were those areas where that device was, as it were, programmed not to work or disturbed from working efficiently by those stakeholders who had other force in line. Otherwise, the smart card reader functioned effectively. And provisions were made where they had problems for immediate replacement. But what did we find? Politicians manipulated the process such that they virtually forced the presiding officers and other electoral personnel who were to handle this device, forced them to do otherwise. And so we had situations where the smart card reader was said not to perform or not to have performed efficiently. That wasn't true. It was a deliberate ploy of those who didn't want the smart card reader to function effectively in their localities. It was in those localities that the smart card reader did not function effectively.
So at the time there were manual backups because that was what INEC said. So if it doesn't work, they revert to the manual accreditation process. But
even then, you recall that INEC had said at the time, if the smart card reader failed, if a smart card reader failed and it was replaced and the replacement still failed, election should be postponed to the next day. That was the situation at that time.
Yeah.
Even though, yes, there were still manual provisions that could tally along with the electronic provisions of the smart card reader.
But you feel that our elections have improved?
They have certainly improved. The smart card reader is a little wonder to our elections. It has made our elections very different from the way they used to be run. Yes.
So one area that perhaps another very interesting angle in this conversation is the cost of campaign, the campaign expenses. And we understand now that there are proposals that for the presidential campaign, for example, it will be jacked up from 1 billion to 15 billion. For you, Senator, does that make sense?
I think legislating that might not really be totally effective. We had a similar experience in 2010 when we pegged the expenditure of respective offices, those second offices, how much they can spend and how much can be donated to them. That never worked. So why would anybody bother if it is 1 billion or it's 15 billion? It still means you must be very, very wealthy to partake. And so the issue of whether it is 15 billion today, we have to consider the fact that the exchange rate continues to fluctuate and it's not going down. So the cost, in literary terms, will continue to increase. But before I complete that, in terms of the issue of electronic voting, whether it can be preloaded. Not preloaded with votes, but when you vote on an electronic voting machine, for example, the record is stored there. And all we need to do is the issue of rights. Who can alter? Who can change? Is it locked immediately 6 p.m. or 7 p.m.? It's locked and you can no longer vote on it. And the fact that the same equipment, if there is no immediate data transmission, stores the record of all the votes in there. And when you get to a place where you have data, you can always upload. And that should not be more than maybe 15, 20 minutes interval. But there will be no room for anyone to manipulate it. It's a question of the design and the solution, what we are trying to achieve. We know the challenges we have, and we know the kind of people that we are. So we have to work and design a situation that is almost, it can't be perfect, because there are people with brains constantly working on how to abuse some of these systems. But we can get a solution that will work for us. And if there is any abuse detected, then we legislate again or correct whatever the anomalies are. We are never going to get a 100% solution from this simple electoral act. We will always continue to look and see loopholes. How can we do better? How can we improve? But let us just start from the basics.
Nigerians are expecting, the manner in which Nigerians are expecting this bill, this act to be passed. For me, in fact, the conversation I'm hearing about the Electoral Act Amendment Bill is such that after the passage, it's going to dramatically change our elections. Will Nigerians be disappointed?
Not necessarily totally disappointed. They won't be, but there will be some shortcomings that we still have to address in the future. We are never going to get a perfect solution from this singular act, but it's a right step in the right direction. Besides, the whole world is going electronics. So there is nothing that is novel anymore in terms of, people vote online now in many countries. So we have to be looking at where do we go next. We are still trying to look at voting. It is something that we cannot run away from. So we either get it now or postpone it to the future. But I think what Nigerians are expecting is that we're expecting a minimum electronic voting and transmission of results. It might not favor me today, but I might be thanking God for Buhari in the future that set this thing to be working in this manner.
Thank you so much, everyone, for staying with us. I saw a quite interesting post on the social media recently where someone said, elections are not won on social media. Elections are won at a polling unit. It's telling people that they should go and register. And when the time comes to vote, they shouldn't sit at home and expect the best. They should actually go out there. The process of getting our elections to that level we want has started. And that is the conversation we are having. The Electoral Act Amendment Bill, which we are hoping that will be passed. Tonight I've been speaking with two gentlemen here who have been speaking from experience on the field and technically, of course, a former INEC staff and a former federal lawmaker. Thank you so much for your time. Let me bring another perspective into this conversation. A senior advocate of Nigeria, Mr. Femi Falana, he joins us virtually. Thank you so much, senior advocate, for joining us. Conversation with you will be in two perspectives. And perhaps let's begin first with the issue of Electoral Act Amendment Bill. I'll get your view before I now take you to the issue of security and what the House of Reps passed. Mr. Falana, the bill has been laid in both chambers of the National Assembly. Let me get your view on how much of work has been done. Are you impressed? I can see you, but I don't know if you can hear me. So I'm saying we should start a conversation with the Electoral Amendment Bill. So far, with the work the National Assembly and the lawmakers have done, are you impressed so far?
Well, it is unfortunate that we are back to square one. It is very embarrassing that the National Assembly members are being accused of opposing electronic transmission of results in this age and time. Secondly, we have also been made to understand that the limits on election expenses has been increased. In the case of a presidential candidate, from 1 billion naira to 15 billion naira, that is about 1,500% increase. Apart from that, INEC is being prevented or is being recommended that INEC will no longer have the power to reject results declared under duress by the resident electoral commissioner. These are very dangerous steps. As if that is not enough, INEC will no longer have the power to assist physically challenged people or people with disabilities to vote. Instead of the duty imposed on INEC, shall, INEC is now being said that INEC may assist people who are physically challenged. If these amendments are passed, it is very clear that the parliament has conspired to survive the electoral process. Because if you take the question of electronic transmission of results, it's going to be logical not to allow that. Because the registration of voters is done electronically. The compilation of voters' register is done electronically. The accreditation of voters is done electronically through the card readers machine. To now say that results will not be tabulated electronically and transmitted electronically will be extremely dangerous. And it's a way of saying to Nigerians that we are not ready for a transparent, fair and free election yet.
There is a lot of implication of this bill to our electoral jurisprudence. I mean, you have been in this sector and you have swum in this water a lot of the time. What do you think is behind the mind of an average or the politicians who are working on this? Because the lawmakers are politicians. They run for elections, so they know the game. What perhaps do you think may be on their minds, and perhaps for you, Mr. Falana, if some of these key areas are not passed, would you consider this effort a futility?
Definitely, it's not just going to be a futility. It's also going to be a gross subversion of the electoral process. And it's a way of taking us several years, back. Because we have gone through this era. We had the Electoral Reform Panel headed by former Chief Justice of Nigeria, the Honorable Justice Muhammad Uwais. The current regime, whose members dominate the National Assembly, campaigned and undertook to implement the recommendations of the Electoral Reform Panel. And some of these recommendations are oozing out of the report of the Uwais panel. It is therefore going to be extremely dangerous not to have a credible electoral process put in place. It's a way of inviting anarchy and chaos. And Nigeria cannot afford that at this point in time, where, according to INEC, since the commencement of the voters register, over 500,000 people have registered, and 66% of them are youth of this country. The young people want to vote, they want to exercise their franchise, and they want to say, enough is enough. Enough of rascality, enough of impunity, enough of corrupt practices. Young people and a majority of Nigerians are desirous to put an end to insecurity in the country, unemployment in the country, and they want to challenge politicians to address the problems of underdevelopment. But the people in the National Assembly, who with profound respect to quite a number of them, and I know that, I think according to the Senate leadership, we have been asked to mobilize those who are representing our various constituencies to appreciate that this is the way our people are thinking. This is the desire of Nigerians. Therefore, don't go to Abuja to subvert, to sabotage democracy in the country. Because it's going to be embarrassing in this age and time not to allow electronic transmission of results. When National Assembly members transfer money, even when they are sitting in both chambers. So how can you now say that we are going to go back to the era of election manipulation of results through manual management or manual compilation of results, manual transfer? Why are we going to be sending planes to be bringing results from the states when they can be sent directly to INEC electronically? And we must join the rest of civilized community in ensuring that we have a credible electoral system.
What is happening now is left for imagination, Mr. Falano, because if you look at what is happening, if some of the grievances people are having about this process, and perhaps some of those who think that if some of these issues are not treated or are not, these matters are not handled properly, their aspirations and their hopes will be dashed as to how this Electoral Act Amendment Bill will help our electoral process. The last time around, President Buhari refused to sign it into law. With what we are saying now, do you foresee any similar situation if this bill goes the way? Because we had a conversation with a House of Representative member on the committee for this bill, and we had a chairman of the Senate. Well, it does look like they're not on the same page. And it looks like there are allegations that for some part of the National Assembly, there are some introduction, which is what the Senate President was saying, and some members of the National Assembly are saying they are not happy. The Southern governors have raised their voice. The Southern caucus of the National Assembly have spoken about this matter. Where do you foresee that these may be going politically?
I don't think we should make this a North-South affair. It's not about ethnic division or regional division. It's about putting a credible electoral process in place. In the North and South, East and West, you have progressive-minded legislators who would like to join the rest of the civilized community by ensuring that we have in place a credible electoral system in the interest of all of us. But if a few people, a cabal, decide to retain the status quo, in fact, sabotage the electoral process, because right now, by virtue of Section 52 of the Electoral Act amended in 2015, INEC is giving unchallenged powers to devise any electoral, any process to guarantee that everybody is able to vote. And so INEC is empowered under the current law to transmit results, to compile results electronically, to tabulate results electronically. But when you now put it in the law that INEC shall not transmit election results electronically, we are in trouble. And I'm sure that Nigerians are going to continue to demand that the proper thing be done in order to ensure that the process we are putting in place will guarantee fair and free election within the usual paradigm. But once you say that INEC will no longer be empowered to cancel result declared under duress by force. I mean, you have two senators in the current National Assembly whose election results were declared under duress at gunpoint. Of course, they were able to manage, and skate through the legal process. And that is what the members of the National Assembly are trying to institutionalize. You cannot institutionalize what is clearly illegal. And so Nigerians must continue to call on their representatives in the Senate and the House of Reps to ensure that this time around we are not going to sabotage the electoral process. And this must also go for the relevant provisions of the Constitution that are going to be amended in order to allow credible elections. For instance, people are suggesting, the bar and the bench, a majority of Nigerians, that we should no longer congest the Supreme Court with election petitions from all over the country. The Supreme Court, until 2011, was generally took appeals from presidential election petition tribunal. But today, from the 36 states of the country, even results of primary elections at local government levels are contested up to the Supreme Court. Today, the Supreme Court no longer has time to attend to other matters. And this is unjust. This is unfair. This is inequitable. There's no way you can set up the Supreme Court of any country that is supposed to be a policy court to deal with only election petitions throughout the year. It's unacceptable. And so people are suggesting that this time around, we must conduct good elections, we must conduct credible elections electronically, so that human interference and manipulation will be reduced to the barest minimum. And when you do that, the question of going to election petition tribunal, will be completely reduced or eliminated. And Nigerians will have more confidence in the electoral system. And our image as a country will be enhanced. But if you institutionalize some of these strategic provisions, we're going to be in trouble.
Mr. Falano, please, before I allow you go, yesterday the House of Reps presented a report of its security summit to President Buhari. The report has several recommendations on the proposed solutions to the insecurity situation in the country. Part of the recommendations include hiring mercenaries, declaring state of emergency in the security sector. It's also asking the president to declare a state of emergency on unemployment, which he said is the main driver of insecurity. The House also asked the Chief of Defense Staff to fish out moles and double agents from the military who have frustrated the fight against insecurity. There are 19 recommendations in that report. Let me get your view on those recommendations and the state of insecurity in the country?
With profound respect to the members of the House of Representatives, those recommendations will need to be reviewed. While one can appreciate their concern, we must stop diverting attention from the problems of insecurity in the country. And when we talk about insecurity, we must appreciate that we're not simply talking about acquiring security gadgets alone. The most important aspect of security is social security. You don't need to say, Mr. President, declare a state of emergency on unemployment. Meaning what? In concrete terms, what you are supposed to do as legislators is to appropriate funds to empower the government to employ young people who are roaming the street, create employment opportunities all over the place, stop reckless importation of goods that can be produced in the country, address dollarization of the economy and the control of the Nigerian economy by the IMF and World Bank through the central bank. Stop neoliberal policies. Stop reckless approval of loans, because you are taking the country to a dangerous situation whereby 97% of the budget of last year was earmarked for or used to service debts. It's unacceptable, whereby, contrary to the laws, contrary to the Constitution and some other laws, you cannot take loans to pay salaries and allowances, jumbo salaries and allowances. You are supposed to take loans for capital development in the country. That is not what is going on. With respect to the army or the armed forces, for me as a Nigerian, I think it is embarrassing to say in this age and time that we should spend money to hire mercenaries when we are not motivating our own soldiers who are ready to fight, when we are not empowering our soldiers who are ready to fight, when we are not giving them the tools, the equipment to fight. I have defended, many officers and men and women in the armed forces who are ready to fight, very patriotic, very committed people. But what is their complaint? The money earmarked for acquisition of weapons is diverted. And that is the duty of the National Assembly. It is not enough to budget appropriate funds, for acquisition of weapons. You must also monitor the fund. Those who are accused of not accounting for the money to buy weapons, to fight, the counter-insurgency operations have been made ambassadors by the National Assembly. So you must ask the relevant questions. It's not about a country that has restored democracy in Sierra Leone, in Liberia, in the Gambia, and other countries, whose armed forces, members of the Nigerian forces, members of the police force, who have participated in UN peacekeeping operations. Electoral have done very well, and they have done the country proud. What has happened? That our armed forces cannot defeat the ragtag army of the Boko Haram sect. And I think these are the questions to ask. But when you say declare a state of emergency on insecurity, it's unfortunate that the National Assembly has no question the deployment of troops without the approval of the National Assembly. You can only do that under Section 305. So by asking the president now to declare a state of emergency, for me, it's like merely formalizing the state of emergency that has been declared in the area of insecurity. But what does it translate to? The president is asking governors, go and secure your states. Do they control the police force or the armed forces? I think these are the questions to ask, and not to go to the president belly aching, asking for a state of emergency on unemployment. Meaning what? In the budget of 2021, what is allocated to earmark for employment? And I think these are the issues to address.
All right, Mr. Femi Falana, Senior Advocate of Nigeria. It's always a pleasure getting your views on this matter. Let's coast home now and get the final thought of my guest here in our Abuja studio on the issue of the Electoral Act amendment and perhaps where we need to go from here. You heard what Mr. Falana said. There's a lot of anticipation. And the Senate President said, look, we're not doing anything. You need to ask your lawmakers. You are a federal lawmaker. At this point, can Nigerians influence what you termed cast in stone earlier?
Well, there's still no room for that 1%, in which case it depends on. The Senate President told the gauntlet that, look, call your National Assembly members, lobby them. Pick up the phone, let them know this is what Nigeria wants. And it is not just what Nigeria wants, it's what Nigeria expects. Because everybody, in spite of the level of insecurity, people still trust the president. Let the same trust be available for our National Assembly members.
But the work is not for the president now.
Yes,
unfortunately,
exactly.
The president won't make the bill. The National Assembly will.
The National Assembly will make the bill and send it. Now, if they do not send what the president wants, again, do you know there is a possibility that he will withhold this asset?
For the president, do you think he will assent to it whatever way?
I believe once they've gotten this far, if this is taken to Mr. President, he will assent.
You think so?
Particularly if the relevant things that are very touchy for Nigerians, things that can move this country forward, that will not be retrogressive for us. If they're inside that bill, which is going to become an act, he would assent to it. I believe we all want to make progress, and we want to make a name. The essence of leadership. Why are you there?
Legacies.
Legacies.
All right.
And this is one.
Yeah. For you, just to wrap up now, what are your expectations?
You see, I thought the National Assembly called for a public hearing of the proposals for the amendment of the Electoral Act. And Nigerians made their representation as to what they desire in the public hearing. And one would have expected that the National Assembly, having received the positions of Nigerians generally through their various representative groups, CSOs and so on and so forth, one will expect that they go back, look at what has been presented to them, the demands, the positions that have been canvassed for them to look at and approve for Nigerians. And not the Senate President now calling Nigerians to go through their representatives to canvass what they need when they have already done that. So I expect that they will simply give Nigerians what Nigerians desire.
And Isiaga, the former director of training at the Independent National Electoral Commissioner, very experienced INEC official. Thank you so much for coming tonight.
Thank you very much.
And a very senior politician too in Nigeria, former federal lawmaker, Senator Ayuarishe. Thank you so much for coming tonight.
It's my pleasure.
I appreciate it.
Sure,
and also, Mr. Femi Falana, thank you so much for your time today. Well, that's our show for today, everyone. We are looking forward to tomorrow. Please don't get your eyes off the ball. We are not right here. We're keeping our eyes on the ball and making sure that we get the best deal from our National Assembly to get the best out of our elections. On behalf of the team right here in Lagos and Abuja, thank you so much, everyone, for watching. I'm Sean Kimale. Bye for now.